Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Go ahead and get comfortable. I need to tell you a story about a day that felt like it was ripped from the pages of a novel, except every single word of it was my life. It was the day I chose to walk back into the world that had decided I no longer existed 11 long years ago. The air inside the Evergreen Resort's grand ballroom was a carefully engineered climate of cool indifference. It was thick with the cloying scent of lilies, and something else, something metallic and sharp, I've come to associate with old money. It was a suffocating combination that clung to the back of my throat, a ghost of a world I had fought to escape. Every surface gleamed with a painful brilliance under the soft, forgiving glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers. The polished marble floors reflected distorted faces. The gold-rimmed champagne flutes waited in perfect formation, and the smiles on the guests were as bright and brittle as spun sugar. My husband, Michael, felt the tension coiling in my shoulders and squeezed my hand. His warmth was a small, solid anchor in a sea of ice. "You deserve to be here, Alina," he murmured, his voice a low, steady vibration meant only for me. I squeezed his hand back, trying to borrow some of his unwavering calm. On the outside, I was composed. I wore a deep sapphire dress, a whisper of silk and confidence that had cost more than my first 2 years of rent combined. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, not a single strand out of place. But inside, beneath the armor of success, I was still that raw 18-year-old girl in a frayed gray hoodie, standing on a cracked sidewalk with a single, pathetic cardboard box containing the remnants of her life. My son Leo tugged at the bow tie I'd wrestled him into. "Mommy, it's choking me," he whispered dramatically, his 8-year-old face a perfect storm of misery. I knelt, the silk of my dress pooling on the marble floor. My fingers, which could navigate the complexities of a corporate merger, fumbled with the simple silk knot. "I know, sweetie, just for a little bit. After all this is over, we'll go straight to the hotel pool, I promise. You can do your famous cannonball." His eyes, a deep blue inherited from Michael, lit up. "A really big one that splashes everyone?" "The biggest," I promised, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. The simple, uncomplicated joy in his face was a breath of fresh air in this stale room. It was for him, for Michael, for the life we had painstakingly built from ashes and sheer will, that I was doing this, that I was here. And then, across the sea of strange yet familiar faces, I saw her. There, bathed in a halo of carefully directed light, stood my sister, Grace, the bride. 11 years, an entire lifetime had passed, and yet she looked almost exactly the same, just more polished, like a stone that had been tumbled until all its rough edges were gone. She had the same wide, guileless eyes that had watched me pack my box without a single word. She had the same delicate frame that had always made her look like she needed to be shielded from the world, a fragility that was, I knew, her greatest weapon. The invitation had read, "Daniel Brooks." I'd assumed, in my long absence, that Grace was still a Monroe. Apparently, some things did change. Our eyes locked across the crowded room. It was like a physical impact. For a split second, the serene, beatific mask of the bride faltered. I saw a flicker of something raw and unfiltered. Shock, yes, but also a primal flash of fear. Then it was gone, expertly tucked away behind the radiant smile she offered to a guest. But the ripple had been sent. The stone had been dropped into the placid water of their perfect day. A voice as sharp and cold as a shard of ice down my back cut through the genteel murmur of the crowd. "What in God's name are you doing here?" My mother, Margaret Monroe. She hadn't aged. She had simply hardened. her bitterness a fantastic preservative. Her face was a masterclass in controlled fury, her eyes sweeping over me, dismissing my dress, lingering on Michael with suspicion, and finally landing on Leo with a look of undisguised contempt. It was as if our very existence was a vulgar stain on her pristine canvas. Before I could form a response, Michael stepped slightly in front of me, a subtle, protective gesture. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tensile strength in his frame that I had leaned on for a decade. "We're guests, Margaret," he said, his tone perfectly even, perfectly polite. "My wife was personally invited by the groom." He let the words hang in the air, a quiet challenge. The use of "my wife" was deliberate, a boundary drawn in the sand. My mother, however, was not one to be deterred by boundaries. "Daniel doesn't know you," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "You have no right to be here. This is a family affair." "Actually," Michael continued, his voice projecting just a little, enough for the cluster of nearby guests to overhear, "he does know her. Or rather, he desperately wants to. He's been trying to get a meeting with my wife's company for the better part of a year. You might have heard of it. It's called MEDOVA." The name. It dropped into the delicate silence like a lead weight. MEDOVA. The whispers started instantly, a subtle hiss of sound spreading through the room. I saw heads turn, eyes widen with dawning recognition. The calculus in their gazes was almost audible. The ghost from the past, the family disgrace, was suddenly reassigned a value. I was no longer just Elena. I was Elena Collins, the CEO of MEDOVA, a name that meant something in their world. A world of hospital board meetings, seven-figure contracts, and medical technology conferences. A world they had been so certain I would never touch. My mother's perfectly made-up face went slack, the color draining from her cheeks. Her carefully constructed composure cracked like a porcelain doll dropped on a marble floor. The look in her eyes was no longer just contempt. It was utter disbelief. And beneath that, something new. Fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. The party, her perfect, triumphant party, had just begun. Thank you for being here to listen to my story. Please let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. It means so much to know we're all connected on this journey. The air around our small, tense circle grew thick with unspoken questions. My mother stood frozen, a statue of indignation, her mouth slightly parted as if searching for a retort that wasn't there. She finally composed herself with a visible, shuddering effort. She shot me a look that was a silent promise of future retribution, and then, with the practiced grace of a seasoned socialite, she turned and melted back into the crowd. I knew that retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a tactical maneuver. She was off to find my father, to regroup and plan a more devastating assault. That was always their way. Attack, retreat, and counterattack with overwhelming force. I took a shaky breath, the heavy scent of lilies suddenly making me feel nauseous. Michael's hand found the small of my back, a steady, grounding pressure. "Just breathe," he whispered into my ear. "You're in control here. Remember the plan." The plan. The plan was to be a fact, an immovable, unexplainable, inconvenient fact. But my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt like a raw nerve, every curious glance from a guest a physical touch, every whispered comment a pinprick against my skin. I saw them, the people I grew up with, whispering behind their champagne glasses, their eyes flicking between me, my mother, and my sister across the room. The prodigal daughter? The black sheep? No, in their eyes I was something far more scandalous. The skeleton from the family closet, now inconveniently animated and dancing at the wedding feast. It didn't take long for my father, Dennis Monroe, to appear. Where my mother was all sharp edges and icy glares, my father was a master of wielding his authority with a veneer of disappointed paternalism. He was a tall man, still strikingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his perfectly coiffed silver hair lending him an air of unimpeachable distinction. He was a doctor, and he wore his profession like a cloak, a symbol of his intelligence, his status, his inherent rightness in all things. "Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. He didn't smile. He looked past me to Michael, a man he had never met, and gave a curt, dismissive nod before his gaze settled back on me. "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. This is a private family event." The implication was as sharp as a scalpel. "You are not family." "There's no misunderstanding, Dennis," Michael said, his tone still perfectly polite, but with an undercurrent of steel. "We received an invitation. We're here to celebrate Grace's marriage to Daniel." My father's gaze hardened as it rested on me. It was the exact same look he had given me the last time I saw him, 11 years ago, standing on our front porch. A look of profound, weary disappointment, as if I were a failed experiment he was finally, mercifully ready to discard. "This is neither the time nor the place for your theatrics," he said, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "You are making a scene, and you are upsetting your mother. For Grace's sake, I am asking you to leave, quietly. For Grace's sake." The family motto, the justification for 1,000 small injustices and one great life-altering betrayal. My entire childhood had been a series of sacrifices laid at the altar of my younger sister's delicate sensibilities. My allowance, my time, my dreams, and finally, my home and my future. A strange, cold wave of calm washed over me, extinguishing the frantic fluttering in my chest. The anxiety that had been churning in my stomach for weeks solidified into something hard and unmovable, like a diamond. I was not that broken 18-year-old girl anymore. I would not be dismissed. I would not be erased. "I don't think so," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as clear and steady as a surgeon's hand. It didn't even tremble. "I'm here to watch my little sister get married. I wouldn't miss it for the world." My father's eyes narrowed into slits. He was a man who was accustomed to immediate, unquestioning obedience. He was not used to being defied, especially by me. He opened his mouth to deliver what I knew would be a cruel and cutting edict, but he was interrupted. A distinguished-looking man with a kind smile and crinkles around his eyes approached our tense circle. "Dennis, my friend, a wonderful event," the man said, clapping my father on the shoulder with an easy familiarity. Then he turned to me, and his eyes lit up with genuine professional recognition. "Dr. Collins, I had no idea you were connected to the Monroe family. It's an honor. I'm Philip Evans, cardiology at St. Jude's. We met at the Boston MedTech conference last month." Your keynote on predictive algorithms in post-operative care was, well, it was revolutionary, absolutely brilliant. We're still talking about it. My father's face was a fascinating, chaotic mask of confusion. He looked from Dr. Evans, a respected colleague, to me, his discarded daughter, and back again. The gears in his brilliant mind were turning, but they were grinding, shrieking, unable to reconcile the two realities. He couldn't connect the good-for-nothing high school grad he had disowned with the brilliant Dr. Collins being lauded by a chief of cardiology. I offered Dr. Evans a warm, professional smile. "Thank you, Dr. Evans. It's a pleasure to see you again. This is my husband, Michael, and our son, Leo." Dr. Evans shook Michael's hand with enthusiasm. "A pleasure." "You must be an incredibly proud husband." Every single day, Michael said, and his eyes met mine, a universe of love and support passing between us in that single glance. The polite, professional conversation flowed around my father, creating a bubble of normalcy that he was not a part of. It left him standing on an island of his own making, his authority rendered utterly irrelevant. He was speechless. For the first time in my entire life, I had rendered Dennis Monroe speechless. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been fundamentally, seismically inverted. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I knew that for the first time, he wasn't seeing his failure of a daughter. He was seeing a stranger. A powerful, successful stranger who held a currency he didn't understand and couldn't control, and it terrified him. He mumbled a weak excuse about checking on the caterers and made a hasty retreat. I watched him go, the hard, diamond-like knot in my chest loosening just a fraction. This was why I had come. Not for a screaming match, not for revenge, but for this. To simply exist in their carefully curated world as myself, and to let the undeniable truth of who I had become speak for itself. Seeing the look of utter bewilderment on my father's face, that carefully constructed facade of paternal authority crumbling into dust, sent a jolt through me, a current of memory so powerful it was almost painful. The opulent ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the respectful tones of Dr. Evans, they all dissolved, melting away like a dream, replaced by the faded floral pattern of our old living room sofa and the bitter smell of burnt coffee from that soul-crushing Tuesday morning in August. I was 18, and I was holding a golden ticket. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope from Stanford University, containing a letter of acceptance and the offer of a full academic scholarship for their pre-med program. It wasn't just a letter. It was a lifeline, a promise of a future I had fought for with every fiber of my being. For years, I had worked tirelessly, tutoring kids who didn't care, waitressing late-night shifts for pocket change, saving every single dollar in a dog-eared bank book. My parents had always spoken of the college fund, a mythical account they had supposedly been contributing to since my birth. They had promised to match my savings. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the money I desperately needed for books, a dorm room deposit, and the 1,000 other hidden costs a scholarship didn't cover. I remember practically floating into the living room that morning, the acceptance letter feeling warm and alive in my hands. "I got in," I announced, my voice trembling with a joy so pure it felt like it might burst from my chest. "Stanford, I actually got in. Full scholarship." My mother was at the dining table, methodically sorting a pile of bills. She didn't look up. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice flat, as if I'd just commented on the weather. My father lowered his newspaper, peering at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Stanford," he repeated, the words sounding foreign and vaguely distasteful in his mouth. "That's a very expensive school, Elena." "But I have the scholarship," I said, my brilliant smile faltering just a little, "and all my savings. I just need the money from the college fund for my deposit and books, and I'll be all set." A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the room. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. My mother stopped shuffling the papers. My father folded his newspaper with a deliberate, agonizing slowness that set my teeth on edge. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was his verdict gesture. "About the college fund," he began, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "There has been a reallocation of assets." I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a chilling premonition. Reallocations? What does that mean? My mother finally looked at me then, her expression a strange, unpalatable mixture of impatience and pity. Your sister, Grace, has been accepted into a very prestigious private design academy in New York. The tuition is, well, it's considerable. I stared at her, the words not making any sense. It was like she was speaking a different language. Grace, who had spent her high school years doodling in notebooks and complaining about homework, had never shown the discipline for anything more demanding than a shopping trip. Her grades were a testament to her profound lack of effort. Grace? But what about my fund? You said that was my college fund. It's a family fund, Elena, my father said, his voice taking on the patient, lecturing tone he used with difficult patients. And we have a responsibility to invest in the child who shows the most potential for a secure, successful future. Grace's program has connections. It's a sure thing. Your pre-med ambitions, on the other hand, are a gamble. It's years and years of difficult schooling with no guarantee of success at the end. The air was punched from my lungs. The golden ticket in my hand suddenly felt like a piece of worthless paper. A gamble? I have a full scholarship to Stanford. I have a 4.0 GPA. I've worked for this my whole life. Grace barely passed chemistry. This memory triggered another, smaller one. I was 12. I'd saved for a whole year to buy a beautiful 10-speed bike. The day I brought it home, Grace had thrown a tantrum, crying that she wanted one too. The next day, my bike was gone. My parents had returned it and bought 2 cheaper, flimsier bikes so Grace wouldn't feel left out. It's for the best, Elena, my father had said. You have to learn to share. Grace is more delicate. That's enough, he snapped now, his voice sharp, yanking me back to the present horror. You are being profoundly ungrateful. We have provided you with a roof over your head for 18 years. Your sister needs this. She is more delicate than you are. The world will be harder for her. Delicate, the family curse. The word that justified everything. Grace was delicate, so she got the last piece of cake. Grace was delicate, so I had to do her chores. Grace was delicate, so my entire future was being casually dismantled to pay for her latest expensive whim. I looked desperately across the room at my sister, who had been sitting silently on the sofa, a passive observer to her own coronation. My eyes were pleading with her. Say something. Tell them it's not fair. Tell them it's my money, my dream. She just looked down at her hands, her long blonde hair falling like a curtain, shielding her from the carnage she was causing. Her silence was her consent. Her silence was the deepest betrayal of all. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud shatter, but a quiet, deep fracture of the soul. The years of quiet resentment, of being the responsible one, the capable one, the one who was always expected to understand and sacrifice, it all curdled into a hot, bitter rage. You stole my money, I whispered, the words raw and shaky. You stole my future. Don't be so dramatic, my mother scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I earned that money. My voice was rising now, cracking with tears I refused to let fall. Every single dollar of it. You promised me. We are your parents, my father declared, standing up to his full imposing height, using his physical presence to dominate the room. Our decision is final. If you cannot support your own sister, if you are going to be this profoundly selfish, then perhaps this is not the right home for you anymore. The ultimatum hung in the air, ugly and absolute. He was casting me out. He was giving me a choice. Accept the injustice in silence, or be erased. I looked at their faces, my father's cold, unyielding authority, my mother's dismissive, irritated annoyance, my sister's calculated, silent fragility, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there was no love for me in that house. There was only utility. I was the reliable workhorse, and now that the delicate show pony needed a new, expensive saddle, the workhorse was expendable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. I turned without another word, walked out of that room, went upstairs to the bedroom that was never truly mine, and packed a single cardboard box. My textbooks, my birth certificate, my meager savings from my waitressing job, and the few clothes I had bought for myself. An hour later, I was standing on the curb, the box at my feet, watching the front door of my childhood home close for the last time. 11 years of struggle followed. 11 years of sleeping on friends' couches, of working 3 jobs at a time, of attending night school with gritty, exhausted determination. 11 years of clawing my way up, inch by painful inch. And then, 2 months ago, a thick, cream-colored envelope had arrived at my office. Grace's looping, overly ornate handwriting was unmistakable. The wedding invitation. Holding it in my hand, in my sterile corner office overlooking the sprawling city, the memory of that day came rushing back, as vivid as if it were yesterday. The old pain was there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was different now. It was no longer a gaping, infected wound. It was a scar, and scars are a reminder that you survived. As I looked at the invitation, at the names of my parents proudly inviting their friends and family to celebrate the marriage of their perfect daughter, a cold, clear, and powerful thought formed in my mind. They erased me. They built their perfect life on my ghost. A slow, deliberate smile spread across my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated resolve. Oh, I would go. I would attend the wedding. I would not come begging for forgiveness or seeking reconciliation. I would come simply to be seen. To stand in the full, bright light of their perfect day and remind them, and all their friends, that the ghost they thought they had buried was very much alive. That was my snap. The moment the victim finally died and the survivor took control of the narrative. Returning to the present moment, to the elegant chill of the ballroom, with the memory of my exile still burning fresh in my mind, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My presence here was anything but an accident or a reckless emotional impulse. It was a calculated move, a strategic deployment planned with the same meticulous precision I used to design a multi-year corporate growth strategy. A few weeks before the wedding, after the initial visceral shock of receiving the invitation had worn off, I had found myself sitting in the quiet, mahogany-paneled office of my lawyer, David Henderson. David was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. He had helped me navigate the treacherous legal landscape of founding a company, from incorporation to intellectual property rights. He had seen me at my most stressed and my most triumphant, and he had never once patronized me. I slid the thick, cream-colored invitation across his vast, polished desk. "I'm going to this," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I need to understand what I'm walking into, from a legal standpoint." He picked it up, his eyes scanning the names. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Monroe, I was under the impression you didn't have any family, Elena." "I don't," I replied, my voice cold. "I have relatives. There is a profound and important difference." I gave him the condensed, clinical version of the story. The stolen college fund, the disownment, the 11 years of complete and total silence. I was pragmatic, outlining my current financial standing, the valuation of MEDOVA, and my personal net worth. I needed to know if, in some twisted version of family law, they could lay claim to any of it. Could my father sue me for some imagined elder support? Could my sister claim emotional distress? In their world, I knew that lawsuits were a form of communication. David listened patiently, his fingers steepled, his gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "First," he said, his voice firm and reassuring, "let's be perfectly clear. They have no claim, Elena, not a single shred of a legal claim. Your success is entirely 100% your own. The statute of limitations on any verbal promise regarding a college fund ran out almost a decade ago. From a legal perspective, you are a fortress. But emotionally, that's a different battlefield entirely. What do you honestly expect to happen when you walk into that room?" "I expect them to be hostile," I admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I expect them to try and humiliate me, to try and have me removed. They will immediately paint me as the villain of the story, the jealous, unstable sister who has come to crash the party and ruin everything. So I ask you again," he said, his gaze steady and serious. "Why go? What is the strategic objective?" "Because I am tired of letting them own the narrative," I said, a fire I hadn't realized was there igniting in my chest, hot and fierce. They built their perfect family story on my erasure. They told their friends, their colleagues, their entire world that I simply failed. I'm just going to show up and be a fact they can't deny, explain, or erase. He nodded slowly, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. "All right, a hostile takeover of the family narrative. I can respect that. My professional advice is simple. Do not engage in screaming matches. Do not make public accusations. You are Dr. Elena Collins, the founder and CEO of MEDOVA. You are an invited guest of the groom. You will behave with the unwavering grace and dignity of your position. Let them be the ones to lose their composure. Let them be the ones to make a scene. Their predictable actions will speak far louder and more convincingly than any accusation you could ever make." His advice solidified my own instincts. It gave my resolve a sharp legal edge. The night before we left for the resort, after Leo was tucked into bed, I sat with Michael in the quiet sanctuary of our living room. The city lights twinkled outside our floor-to-ceiling windows, a galaxy of our own making. I showed him the wedding gift I had prepared for Grace. It was a simple, elegant envelope from my personal stationer. Inside was not a check or a gift card. It was a beautifully printed stock certificate for 100 shares of MEDOVA, registered in the name of Grace Monroe. It was a significant amount of money, a life-changing amount for most people. Michael looked at it, then at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Elena?" "It's not a peace offering," I explained softly, "and it's not forgiveness. It's a statement of fact, written in the only language they have ever truly understood, the language of money and status. This document says, the person you threw away, the person you called a failure, is more successful than you could ever have imagined. And more importantly, it's a trackable, legal document. It is irrefutable proof that I was here and that I came with ostensibly generous intentions, no matter what lies they try to spin later on. It's a preemptive strike against their narrative." "It's a power move," he said, a note of quiet admiration in his voice. "It's a chess move," I corrected him gently, "and I've spent the last 11 years of my life learning how to play the game." We talked for hours, walking through every possible scenario. What if they called security? We would leave quietly with our dignity intact. What if they made a public scene? We would remain calm and let them expose their own toxicity. For every potential move they could make, we had a calm, rational, and prepared response. Our plan was not to fight, but to be an unmovable object. To be a rock of truth against which their waves of lies and hysteria would break again and again. Michael took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, his thumb stroking my knuckles, "I want you to remember who you are. You're not the broken girl they threw out of their house. You are the woman who built an empire from nothing. You're my wife, and you're Leo's mom. That is your truth. Don't you ever let them take that away from you." His words were my armor. Walking into that ballroom, I wasn't just Elena Monroe, the rejected daughter. I was Dr. Collins, a wife, a mother, a CEO. I was a fortress, built brick by painful brick over a decade of relentless struggle, and I was more than ready for the siege. The conversation with my father, the whispers from the guests, my mother's venomous glare, they were just the first arrows fired, and they had all bounced harmlessly off my walls, falling uselessly at my feet. The wedding reception was in full swing. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. We found a small table near the back, a strategic vantage point from which I could observe the proceedings. Leo was happily munching on a miniature quiche, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. It was then that the groom, Daniel Brooks, finally made his way over to us. I had only seen him in pictures, a handsome man with a confident smile and intelligent eyes. He was a hospital administrator, I knew, which explained his interest in MEDOVA. He approached our table with a purpose, his smile warm and genuine. "You must be Elena," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Daniel. I can't thank you enough for coming. I was so thrilled when I saw your RSVP. I've been trying to get a meeting with someone, anyone from MEDOVA for months. Your patient monitoring system is a game changer. I'm hoping to get it approved for the entire Davis Hospital network." I shook his hand, my mind racing. So he had invited me. He'd likely seen my name on a list of industry leaders and sent a courtesy invitation, never dreaming of the family connection. He thought I was a business contact. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Daniel," I said, keeping my tone professional. "And congratulations. Grace is a beautiful bride." "Thank you," he beamed. "She's amazing. The brains behind her family's medical clinic, a Stanford graduate. She's the whole package." He said it with such genuine pride that I felt a momentary pang of something akin to pity. He had no idea. Our conversation was cut short by the clinking of a glass. My father was on the small stage, ready to give his toast. He spoke glowingly of Grace, of her natural talent and her brilliant mind. He painted a picture of a perfect daughter who had graduated with honors from Stanford and had seamlessly taken over the management of the family practice. It was a beautiful work of fiction. After the toast, several of my father's colleagues, all doctors, gathered around Grace and Daniel. I watched from a distance as they engaged her in conversation. I could see her smile, a little too bright, a little too fixed. I knew what was happening. They were talking shop. They were asking her about her studies, about specific professors at Stanford Medical, about her opinion on new treatment protocols. And I could see her floundering. Her answers were vague, evasive. She kept trying to steer the conversation back to her management role at the clinic, but they were persistent. One of them, a stout man with a booming voice, asked her a direct question about a recent cardiology paper. Grace's face went blank. She laughed it off, saying she was more focused on the business side now, but the damage was done. A look of confusion passed between the doctors. My father, ever watchful, noticed the shift. He swooped in, putting a proprietary arm around Grace. All right, gentlemen, let's not bore my daughter with work talk on her wedding day, he said, with a hearty laugh, steering her away. He caught my eye from across the room. His expression was thunderous. He saw me watching, saw me witnessing the cracks appear in their perfect facade. He strode over to my table, his movements stiff with anger. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a low command. "You are deliberately trying to ruin your sister's day." "I haven't said a word to anyone," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze. "Your presence here is the problem," he seethed. "This is a celebration of Grace's accomplishments. We don't need you here, casting a shadow with your past." Before I could respond, Dr. Evans, the cardiologist from earlier, appeared at my father's elbow. "Dennis, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I was just telling my colleagues about your daughter here." He beamed at me. "You must be bursting with pride. The keynote she gave at the Boston MedTech conference? My God, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Her patient monitoring system is being implemented in 27 hospitals nationwide, and that's just the beginning. A true visionary." My father's face was a study in conflicting emotions, pride, confusion, and a deep, simmering rage. He couldn't deny what Dr. Evans was saying, but he couldn't accept it either. To accept my success would be to admit that he was wrong, and Dennis Monroe was never wrong. "Yes, well, Alina has always been determined," he managed to say, the words sounding like they were being dragged from his throat. Dr. Evans nodded enthusiastically. A brilliant mind. It must run in the family. 2 daughters, both Stanford graduates, both excelling in the medical field. You've done a magnificent job, Dennis. The statement hung in the air, a ticking time bomb. Daniel, who had rejoined the group, overheard the last part. His brow furrowed. He looked at me, then at Grace, who was now standing awkwardly beside my father. A seed of doubt had been planted, and I had a feeling it was about to sprout. The atmosphere had shifted. The polite murmurs of the party continued, but around our corner of the room, the air was electric with unspoken tension. Daniel was looking at me, a question forming in his eyes. My father was practically vibrating with fury, while Grace just looked pale and terrified. And then the final catalyst arrived in the form of my sweet, innocent son. Leo, having finished his 3rd miniature quiche, slid off his chair and walked over to the bridal party. He looked up at Grace, his head tilted with the guileless curiosity of a child. "Are you my mommy's sister?" he asked, his voice clear as a bell in a momentary lull in the music. Grace forced a tight smile. "Yes, I am." "Wow," Leo said, his eyes wide. "Mommy said you were smart." "Did you go to Stanford like my mommy did?" A collective intake of breath. It was so quiet I could hear the fizz of champagne bubbles in a nearby glass. Every eye in our little group swiveled to me, then to Daniel, then to Grace. Daniel's face was unreadable, but his voice was calm, almost gentle when he spoke. "Stanford? You went to Stanford too, Elena?" This was it, the moment of truth. I didn't have to lie or accuse. I just had to state a fact. "Yes," I said simply. "Class of 2014, summa cum laude." The information landed. Dr. Evans, the cardiologist, clapped Daniel on the back. "Well, I'll be damned, Dan. You didn't tell me you were marrying into the Collins medical dynasty. First Elena, now Grace." You know, Elena's work on post-op complication algorithms is revolutionary. The man who wrote the book on it, Professor Albright, taught at Stanford. I'm sure your wife must have studied under him as well. All eyes turned to Grace. She looked like a cornered animal. He was on sabbatical my final year. she stammered, her eyes darting towards my mother for help. Daniel's gaze was now fixed on his new wife. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. "You told me you graduated from Stanford Medical," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I was there from 2008 to 2012 for my MHA. I knew almost every professor in the medical school. I've never heard your name mentioned by any of them, not once." Grace's face was as white as her dress. "It was a special program," she floundered, grasping at straws. "Mostly distance learning. It was a new pilot they were testing." The lie was so clumsy, so desperate, it was painful to witness. Daniel's voice was like ice. "Stanford Medical School does not offer distance learning degrees," he said, each word a hammer blow. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world shattering into a million pieces. The years of lies, the stolen credentials, the entire false narrative they had built, it all came crashing down in the middle of a wedding reception, undone by a child's innocent question and a simple, verifiable fact. My mother tried to intervene. "Daniel, this is hardly the time." "I think it's the perfect time," he cut her off, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "I'm beginning to realize there are a lot of things about my wife and her family that I don't seem to know." He turned his back on Grace and her stunned parents and walked directly toward me. His face was a mask of cold fury and dawning horror. "You and I need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." He led me away from the wreckage, away from the shocked stares of the guests and the frantic, panicked faces of my family. As we walked toward a quiet alcove, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I hadn't fired a single shot. I had simply shown up and told the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was more devastating than any weapon I could have possibly wielded. The entire foundation of their lives was a lie, and it had just crumbled into dust. Thank you for watching this far. You are a wonderful and patient person. Please like this video and comment with the number 1 below, so I know you've journeyed with me to this point. Your support means the world to me and encourages me to keep going. Please comment with a 1 and listen to what happened next. Daniel led me to a small, secluded terrace overlooking the resort's gardens. The cool night air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. For a moment, we stood in silence, the distant sound of the string quartet the only thing breaking the stillness. "Start from the beginning," he said finally, his back still to me. "And please, don't leave anything out." And so I told him. I told him everything. I spoke in a calm, measured tone, laying out the facts as if I were presenting a case study. I told him about my acceptance to Stanford and the college fund my parents had reallocated to Grace for a design school she dropped out of after 1 semester. I told him about being thrown out of my home at 18 with nothing but a cardboard box. "I graduated summa cum laude," I said, my voice steady, while working 3 jobs to support myself. I worked as a hospital receptionist, a waitress, and I cleaned labs at night. That's where I met Michael. He was a surgical resident, and he used to see me asleep in the on-call room with a textbook on my chest. He was the first person in years who saw me as more than just a piece of furniture. I told him how Michael and I had started MEDOVA in our tiny 1-bedroom apartment, fueled by coffee and a shared belief that we could make things better for patients. How we'd poured every dollar we had, and then some, into the company. "We didn't take a salary for the first 3 years," I said, a faint smile touching my lips at the memory. "We lived on ramen noodles and his residence stipend. The stock certificate I brought as a wedding gift for Grace, it represents a fraction of what we built. Last quarter's revenue was just under $400 million. Daniel finally turned to face me. The anger in his eyes was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound sense of shock and something else, respect. 400 million? He whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. And they called you a failure. They needed me to be a failure, I explained. If I was a failure, it justified what they did. It made them the heroes who made a tough choice, and me the ungrateful child who couldn't cut it. My success destroys that story. Our conversation was interrupted by my mother. She had tracked us down, her face a mask of desperation. "Daniel, there you are. Your bride is asking for you. Let's not let a little family misunderstanding ruin this beautiful day." She tried to take his arm, to physically pull him away from me, the source of the contamination. Daniel recoiled as if her touch had burned him. "Get your hands off me, Margaret," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You and I will be having a conversation later, a very long conversation involving lawyers." My mother's face crumpled. The threat of legal action, of financial consequences, was something she understood far better than emotional appeals. She scurried away, defeated. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, my story was being corroborated from another angle. I found out later that as my mother was trying to spin her lies to the remaining guests, Elena was always so jealous of Grace's achievements, she made the mistake of saying it to Mrs. Gable, an old family friend who had known us since we were children. Mrs. Gable, a woman I always remembered as being rather timid, apparently stood up and said, her voice trembling but clear, "That's not true, Margaret. I remember Elena studying until midnight every single night. I remember you bragging about her perfect grades. And I remember you telling me, after she left, that she'd had a nervous breakdown and dropped out of school. You lied. You've been lying for years." The public condemnation from one of her own peers was a devastating blow. The narrative was no longer mine against theirs. It was now fact against fiction. I decided it was time to leave. I had done what I came to do. I found Grace in the ladies' lounge, surrounded by her bridesmaids, her face stained with tears. When she saw me, she dismissed them. "Why?" she sobbed, once we were alone. "Why would you do this to me, Elena, on my wedding day?" The blame. Always the blame. After everything, she still saw herself as the victim. "Do what, Grace?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "I didn't say a word against you. I answered a direct question. I simply existed. The lies were all yours." "They told everyone you were a dropout," she cried. "They said you couldn't handle the pressure. It was easier to just go along with it." "Easier for you, maybe," I said. I looked at my sister, at the expensive dress and the diamond earrings, all paid for by a man she had deceived. You built your life on a foundation of lies. Sooner or later, it was bound to collapse. It's just a shame you dragged Daniel into it. I turned and walked away, leaving her there with the ruins of her perfect day. Before we left, I walked over to the gift table. I took the elegant envelope containing the stock certificate and placed it prominently on top of the pile. Let them see it. Let them know what they had thrown away. As we walked toward the exit, Michael and Leo on either side of me, Daniel caught up to us. "Elena, wait," he said. I am so sorry for all of it." "It's not your fault, Daniel," I said. "You were a victim in this too." "I'd still like to visit MEDOVA sometime," he said, a faint, wry smile on his face. "For purely professional reasons, of course." "Of course," I replied. "Have your people call my people." We were almost out the door when my mother made one last desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. "Elena was always so headstrong," she announced to a nearby group of guests, her voice artificially bright. "But she had advantages, of course, advantages we couldn't give Grace." Michael, who had been silent for most of the evening, stopped. He turned around and looked directly at my mother. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. "What advantages were those, Margaret?" he asked. "The advantage of working 3 jobs to put herself through night school? The advantage of sleeping on a friend's sofa because you stole her college fund? Or the advantage of having a family who threw her out like garbage because she refused to be a doormat? Please, enlighten me. What advantages did she have?" My mother stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, with no sound coming out. There was nothing left to say. Her lies had been dissected, exposed, and left bare for all to see. We walked out into the cool night air and didn't look back. As we got into the car, Leo looked at me from his car seat, his face serious. "Mommy, weren't those people our family?" I turned and looked at my son, my beautiful, honest son. I reached back and stroked his cheek. "They're relatives, sweetie," I said softly. "Family is different. Family is right here, in this car. Family tells the truth." And as we drove away, leaving the glittering lights and ugly truths of the evergreen resort behind us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The ghost of the past was finally at rest. The war was over, and I had won. Life has a way of moving on, even after seismic events. The month following the wedding was a blur of board meetings, product launches, and school projects with Leo. I immersed myself in the life I had built, a life filled with purpose, respect, and genuine love. I didn't speak to my relatives. I didn't need to. The silence was more eloquent than words could ever be. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 4 weeks after the wedding, my assistant, Meredith, buzzed my office intercom. "Dr. Collins, a Daniel Brooks is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." I hesitated for only a second. "Send him in, Meredith." Daniel walked into my office looking thinner, more tired than he had at the wedding, but his eyes were clear and determined. He wore a business suit, not a tuxedo, and he looked more at home, more himself. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, shaking my hand. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to a chair. "How are you, Daniel?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I'm in the process of getting an annulment," he said directly, "on the grounds of fraud. It turns out lying about your entire identity and educational background is a pretty solid reason." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Don't be," he said, his gaze firm. "You didn't do this. They did. And Grace, she confessed everything, the whole sordid story. It was even worse than what you told me." He paused, leaning forward in his chair. "But that's not why I'm here, Elena. After I left, after I started the annulment process, something about my father-in-law's clinic kept bothering me. The numbers Grace had shown me when we were engaged, they didn't add up. The profits were too high for a small private practice." My blood ran cold. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "I have a background in healthcare finance," he continued, "so I did some digging. I made some calls to friends who work in medical billing and compliance, and I found it. It was buried deep, but it was there. For the last 5 years, your father's clinic has been systematically committing Medicare fraud, upcoding services, billing for procedures that never happened, falsifying patient records. We're talking millions of dollars." I just stared at him, speechless. I knew my father was arrogant and selfish, but I never thought he was a common criminal. The level of his deceit was breathtaking. He had built his entire reputation, his comfortable life, on a foundation of lies and stolen government money. The stolen college fund was just the beginning. "What did you do?" I whispered. "I gathered all the evidence I could find," he said, his face grim. "And last week, I submitted it all in an anonymous tip to the Office of the Inspector General." He had dropped a bomb that would not just shatter their reputations, but could very well land them in prison. He had become the instrument of a justice far more severe than mere social humiliation. "You need to know," he added quickly, "your name is not involved in any of it. This all started long after you were gone. You are completely clear." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you for telling me, Daniel." "I felt you had a right to know," he said, standing up. "The investigation will take time, but it will be thorough. They won't get away with it." After he left, I stood by my window, looking down at the bustling city below. My initial shock gave way to a cold, hard sense of finality. This was the true consequence of their actions. The wedding was just the unraveling of a thread. The Medicare fraud was the entire rotten tapestry. A few days later, a voicemail appeared on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. It was Grace. Her voice was frantic, sobbing. "Elena, you have to help us. They're investigating the clinic. Dad says you have connections, you have lawyers. You have to do something. We're family." I listened to the message, to the desperate, entitled plea from the sister who had stood by and watched as my future was taken from me. The sister who had lived a lie at my expense. Without a moment's hesitation, I pressed the delete button. Some ties once severed can't be mended, and some people have to face the consequences they create all on their own. Spring arrived, painting the world in shades of green and gold. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and it felt like a lifetime. The world of the Monroes had become a distant, unpleasant memory, like a bad dream that fades with the morning light. My world, however, had never been more vibrant. I was in my backyard, kneeling in the soft earth of my garden, showing Leo how to gently transplant tomato seedlings. The sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled of damp soil and blooming jasmine. This was my peace. This was my sanctuary. Michael came out onto the patio, carrying 2 tall glasses of lemonade. He was smiling. A wide, genuine smile that still made my heart skip a beat after all these years. "I have some good news," he said, handing me a glass. The cool condensation was a welcome relief on my dirt-smudged hands. "More good news?" I teased. "We just closed the deal with the European Hospital Consortium last week." "This is bigger," he said, his eyes sparkling. "The board at the Davis Hospital Network just gave unanimous approval. They're implementing the MEDOVA patient monitoring system across all 5 of their hospitals. It's our largest contract to date. Daniel Brooks sends his regards." I sat back on my heels, stunned. 5 hospitals? It was a massive validation of our work, of the dream that started in our tiny apartment. Leo, hearing the excitement, ran over and gave me a big, muddy hug. I laughed, holding him close, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. We had done it. A few days later, amidst a pile of mail on my desk at the office, was a single, hand-addressed envelope. The return address was a post office box in a town I didn't recognize. The handwriting was messy, hesitant, but I knew it instantly. It was from Grace. For a long time, I just stared at it. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash, unopened. But something stayed my hand. Curiosity, maybe? Or perhaps the sense that this was the final chapter, and I needed to read it to truly close the book. I slid it open with a letter opener. The letter inside was written on cheap, lined notebook paper. It was several pages long. "Elena," it began. "I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't blame you if you don't. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I have no right. There is no money to ask for anyway." She went on to detail the aftermath of the investigation. The clinic had been shut down, their assets were frozen. My father had lost his medical license and was facing jail time. My mother, stripped of her social standing and wealth, had become a bitter, broken woman. Daniel had finalized the annulment and disappeared from their lives. The perfect family had been utterly and completely destroyed. "They blame you," she wrote. They say you orchestrated all of it, but I know you didn't. This was all us. It was our greed, our pride, our lies. I see that now. Standing in the middle of all this wreckage, it's the only thing that's clear. I need you to know something. You were never the problem. I was. I was weak and I was a coward. I let them give me things I didn't earn because I was too scared to try and earn them myself. I let them tear you down to build me up, and I never said a word. I am so, so sorry, Elena, for everything, for everything. The letter was stained with what looked like teardrops. She wrote that she was living in a small apartment 2 hours away, working as a waitress. She was taking a night class to get a basic medical coding certificate. She was starting from zero. The letter was not an excuse. It was a confession. It was the first honest thing I had ever received from my sister. I read it twice, then folded it and put it away. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt quiet. A week later, I was reviewing applications for our summer internship program at MEDOVA. They were mostly from bright-eyed college students from top universities. On a whim, I pulled up the application form on my computer. In the section for the applicant's name, I typed Grace Monroe. I filled out the basic information I knew and left the essay questions blank. I printed the form, put it in a fresh envelope, and mailed it to the P.O. box from her letter. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't forgiveness in a tidy package. It was simply a door, slightly ajar. A chance for her to build something real, from the ground up, on her own terms. Whether she chose to walk through it was up to her. I had given her one thing our parents never had, an opportunity she had to earn. The following year, at the annual U.S. Health Tech Conference, I was delivering the opening remarks. MEDOVA had become a leader in the industry, and my story, in a sanitized professional version, had become something of an inspiration. After my speech, as I was speaking with some colleagues, I saw a familiar figure lingering at the edge of the crowd. It was Grace. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the plain navy blue uniform of a conference volunteer. She wore a badge that read, Grace M., Medical Coding Intern. Our eyes met. She gave me a small, hesitant nod. I nodded back. There were no words exchanged. None were needed. She was there. She was working. She had walked through the door. Her journey was her own now. A few months after that, I finalized the paperwork for a project that had become deeply important to me. I stood at a press conference with Michael and Leo in the front row and announced the formation of the Monroe First Generation Medical Scholarship. I used my mother's maiden name, a quiet tribute to the one person in my lineage who, I'd been told, had been a nurse with a fierce and independent spirit. The scholarship would fully fund the education of 20 promising students each year who were the first in their families to pursue medicine, with a special focus on those without financial or emotional support from their relatives. It was my way of turning the poison of my past into an antidote for someone else's future. It was my way of ensuring that another bright, determined 18-year-old would never have to stand on a curb with a single cardboard box watching their dreams be stolen. The story really ends where it began, in my garden. A few weeks ago, I was teaching Leo how to prune the roses. He was carefully snipping away the dead branches, his small face a mask of concentration. "Mommy, why do we have to cut these ones off?" he asked, pointing to a weak-looking stem. "Well, sweetie," I explained, my hands guiding his, "some plants don't grow well when they're too crowded. They compete for sunlight and water, and sometimes the bigger, stronger plants take everything, leaving the little ones to wither. You have to give them their own space to grow strong." Leo stopped and looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden understanding that only children can have. "Like people, right?" he asked. "Like those relatives at the wedding?" I looked at my son, at his incredible empathetic heart, and I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I pulled him into a hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood. "Yes, Leo," I whispered into his hair, "exactly like people. Sometimes you have to prune away the parts that are holding you back so you have room to grow." And in that moment, surrounded by the life I had nurtured, in the soil I had tilled with my own 2 hands, I knew I was finally, truly free. The past was no longer a ghost that haunted me. It was just a story. A story of a girl who learned that the most important foundation you can ever build is the one you create for yourself. Thank you for listening to my entire story. I am truly grateful for your time. Please comment with the letter A so I know you are one of the special people who made it all the way to the end. If you have any feelings or thoughts about the story, please share them below. I read every comment. And please continue to click on other videos on our channel to enjoy more of our stories. Thank you again.